When we think of Vikings, we often picture fierce warriors with horned helmets, sailing long ships and raiding coastal towns. But behind the sagas and a lot of the pop culture romance, there's a much darker, often untold story. The story of the women they captured. What happened to them after a raid was in many ways worse than death. It was the complete erasure of a person. First, let's get one thing straight. Viking raids weren't just chaotic smash and grabs. They were highly organized, financed operations, almost like a startup venture. And the primary goal wasn't just gold and silver, it was human cargo. People were the most valuable prize. The Vikings were strategic. They didn't just sail up to fortified cities. Instead, they targeted soft spots, isolated monasteries, coastal villages, and quiet settlements. Why? Because that's where they'd find the easiest targets: clergy, villagers, and especially women and children who were less able to fight back. Once a woman was captured, her life as she knew it ended instantly. She became a thrall, the Norse word for a slave. Her name was taken away, her family ties were severed, and her social identity was completely erased. Legally, she was no longer a person. She was property, listed in legal texts alongside cattle and other livestock. Her owner had absolute power over her. She couldn't own property, she couldn't testify in court, and she had no legal rights whatsoever. If someone hurt or killed her, the compensation was paid to her owner, not her family, because she was considered a damaged piece of property. The journey to this new life was brutal. Captured women were often forced to march long distances to the coast, tied together to prevent escape. Then they were packed onto the famous Viking longships. These ships were masterpieces of naval engineering, but for captives, they were floating prisons. They were crammed into tight spaces, exposed to the elements, with little food or water. Disease was rampant, and many didn't even survive the journey. This wasn't just a trip across the bay. Vikings traveled vast distances. If they survived the journey, they ended up in one of the great slave markets of the Viking world. Places like Dublin, which the Vikings called Dyflin, Hedeby in modern-day Germany, or Birka in Sweden were bustling hubs of this horrific trade. Here, women were inspected, priced, and sold like animals. From these markets, they could be transported all across the known world, throughout Scandinavia, across the British Isles, down the rivers of Russia to the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople, or even to the bustling markets of Baghdad. We have historical accounts from Arab travelers who were shocked and fascinated by these tall, blonde traders selling people from the north. For those who were sold, life became a cycle of relentless labor and exploitation. Enslaved women were responsible for all the back-breaking household chores. They ground grain for hours a day, cooked, cleaned, milked cows, and made cheese and butter. One of their most important tasks was textile production, spinning wool and weaving cloth on heavy looms. This wasn't just for the household. Textiles were a major economic export for the Vikings. The beautiful sails that powered their longships and the fine woolen cloth they traded were often made by the hands of enslaved women, working in grueling conditions. Beyond the physical labor, there was a constant looming threat of sexual exploitation. Enslaved female thralls were legally at the mercy of their owners. There was no concept of consent. An owner could use his female slaves however he wished, and this was considered his right. Many women were forced into concubinage. Any children born from these unions were also typically slaves, belonging to the owner, though sometimes they could be acknowledged and freed by their father. This reality is a stark contrast to the romanticized image of Viking shield maidens. For most women in the Viking world, especially the captured ones, life was defined by servitude. And we have more than just sagas and texts to prove this. Modern science has confirmed the scale of this practice. Genetic studies of the modern Icelandic population have revealed a fascinating and tragic story. The male lineage is overwhelmingly Scandinavian, while the female lineage is heavily Celtic, from Ireland and Scotland. This provides clear DNA evidence of a massive, gender-biased migration. Norse men colonizing new lands and bringing with them vast numbers of enslaved Celtic women. Now, not every captive was treated the same. If a captured woman was of high status, a noblewoman or royalty, she might be spared the worst of the physical labor. Instead, she became a political pawn. She could be ransomed back to her family for a huge sum of gold, silver, or land. But even then, her life was lived in constant fear. She was a bargaining chip, and her fate depended entirely on the whims of her captors and the wealth of her family. In the most extreme cases, a woman's life could end as part of a grim ritual. Some high-status Viking chieftains were buried with their possessions to accompany them into the afterlife, and sometimes those possessions included people. Archaeological finds have uncovered graves where a chieftain is buried alongside a sacrificed woman. The most famous and graphic account comes from an Arab traveler named Ahmad ibn Fadlan, who witnessed the ship burial of a Rus chieftain. He described in horrific detail how a female thrall volunteered to be sacrificed to join her master in the next world. She was given intoxicating drinks, subjected to rituals, and then killed by an elder woman known as the Angel of Death, before being placed on the funeral pyre with her deceased owner. It's important to understand that slavery wasn't a fringe activity in Viking society. It was the bedrock. The entire social and economic structure was built on the backs of thralls. Their labor freed up the Norse men to go raiding, exploring, and trading. The wealth that flowed into Scandinavia, funding their expansion and building their famous settlements, was derived directly from the sale and exploitation of human beings. It was completely normalized. Was there any escape? Rarely. Freedom, or manumission, was not common. An owner might free a loyal slave in their will, or a slave might be able to buy their freedom if they were somehow allowed to earn money, but these were exceptions. For the overwhelming majority of captured women, being a thrall was a life sentence. So what ended this era? Over time, the influence of Christianity began to change things. As Scandinavians converted, the church discouraged the enslavement of fellow Christians. This didn't end slavery, but it shifted the focus. Viking-era traders began targeting pagan peoples to the east, especially Slavic and Baltic communities. The kind of large-scale chattel slavery seen during the height of the Viking Age gradually faded, though servitude in different forms continued for centuries. The legacy of the Vikings is complex. We rightly admire their incredible shipbuilding, their fearless exploration, and the rich mythology they left behind, but we can't ignore the foundation upon which those achievements were built. It was a society powered by violence and exploitation, and the stories of the uncounted women who were captured, enslaved, and erased from history are an essential, tragic part of that story. Their suffering was the hidden cost of the Viking Age. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video informative, please hit the like button and subscribe for more dives into the lesser-known parts of history. See you next time.